My estranged daughter returned only to exploit my love and inheritance, secretly researching ways to declare me incompetent. When I discovered her hidden financial documents and manipulative journal entries detailing her schemes, I revised my will, excluding her, and secured my assets. Before we dive into the story, remember to hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're tuning in from. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning, a day like any other in my quiet, routines-filled existence. Clara was in the midst of watering my orchids, a small, vibrant rebellion against the creeping loneliness that had settled over my home since my husband, Arthur, passed 3 years ago. The house, a sprawling two-story Victorian with deep verandas and a rambling garden, felt too large for just one person. It had once been a place of laughter, of shared dreams, of family dinners that stretched late into the evening. Now, its silence often echoed with the absence of those cherished sounds. The caller ID read blocked number, and a familiar prickle of apprehension traced its way down my spine. I almost let it go to voicemail, a habit formed after years of telemarketers and robocalls, but something, a faint whisper of intuition, urged me to answer. I lifted the receiver, my hand, though steady, held a tremor of something I couldn't quite place. "Hello," I said, my voice a little reedy, unused to long conversations. A pause, heavy with unspoken possibilities, then a voice, tentative yet undeniably familiar, floated through the receiver. It was softer than I remembered, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to the confident, sometimes sharp tones of my memories. "Mom, it's Sarah." My hand, holding the watering can, trembled uncontrollably, and a cascade of water overflowed the pot, spilling onto the polished wood floor. My breath hitched in my throat. Sarah, my daughter, my only child, the daughter who had vanished from my life almost a decade ago after a tumultuous, searing argument following her divorce from Daniel. She had simply packed a small bag, leaving behind a crumpled note on the kitchen counter that read, "I need to find myself. Don't look for me, I'll be in touch when I'm ready." And then, silence. Years of unanswered calls, emails that bounced back, letters returned unopened, and a gaping, aching hole in my heart that no amount of orchids, no quiet routines, no gentle friends could ever truly fill. "Sarah," I managed, the name a raw, fragile sound on my lips, thick with unshed tears. Is that really you, my Sarah?" The disbelieving whisper was barely audible. A soft, almost hesitant laugh, one that seemed to hold both nervousness and a touch of the old mischievousness, floated back to me. "Yes, Mom, it's me. I know it's been a long time. Too long, I know." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history, with the ghosts of birthdays, holidays, and milestones missed. Arthur's passing, my own illnesses, her own presumed struggles, all lost in a decade of silence. "Where have you been? Are you all right? Why didn't you call? What happened? Are you safe?" The questions tumbled out, a dam breaking within me, my carefully constructed composure crumbling in an instant. The composure I had spent years building, piece by painful piece, to shield myself from the grief of her absence. "I'm okay, Mom. Better than okay, actually. I needed time to figure things out, to find my footing. It was a chaotic period, and I wasn't good company, but I've been thinking about you so much lately. Every day, really. I miss you terribly." "Miss you." The words were a balm to my aching soul, a melody I hadn't realized I was so desperate to hear. For years, I had replayed that last fight, dissecting every word, every nuance, blaming myself for her departure. Had I been too strict, too critical, not understanding enough of her struggles after the divorce? Now her voice, soft and regretful, seemed to erase those self-recriminations, replacing them with a fragile, soaring hope. Can I come home, Mom, just for a little while? I don't have anywhere else to go right now, and I truly miss you. I need you." My heart swelled, a mixture of disbelief, overwhelming relief, and a desperate yearning for the daughter I had lost. Home. She wanted to come home. It was the answer to a prayer I had long since stopped articulating, afraid of the crushing disappointment. The silence in the house, which had once echoed with Arthur's absence, now felt full of the promise of Sarah's return. "Of course, darling. Of course you can, always. This is your home, Sarah. It always has been." I felt hot tears welling in my eyes, blurring my vision, but these were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long suddenly seemed to dissipate, replaced by a radiant warmth that spread through my chest, chasing away the shadows. We talked for an hour, a cautious dance around the gaping holes in her story. She spoke vaguely of travels, of working odd jobs in various cities, of finding clarity and spiritual journeys that led her through different states. I didn't press for specifics, afraid to break this fragile new connection, afraid that too many questions might scare her away again. All that mattered in that moment was that she was coming back. We agreed she would arrive the following week, taking a bus from a distant city. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen, a wide, unthinking smile plastered on my face, water dripping unnoticed from the orchid pot. I looked around, suddenly seeing my home with new eyes. It wasn't just my sanctuary anymore, it was about to become a place of reunion, a canvas for renewed family bonds. I thought of the dusty photo albums tucked away in the den, the boxes of old letters and childhood trinkets. We would look through them together, we would talk, we would heal. The thought filled me with an almost childish giddiness, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, I began preparing for her arrival with a fervor I hadn't known I still possessed. I aired out her old bedroom, throwing open the windows to let in the spring breeze, changing the sheets to her favorite lavender scent, plumping the pillows until they were perfect. I bought her favorite tea, the herbal blend she used to drink as a teenager, and stocked the fridge with the organic yogurt she preferred. I even considered repainting her room, a cheerful yellow, but decided against it, wanting her to find it just as she had left it, a comforting echo of her youth, a tangible link to a past we could reclaim. I imagined our conversations, the laughter, the shared meals on the patio, the quiet evenings watching old movies. I pictured her settling back into her life here, finding peace and perhaps, finally, finding herself. This reunion felt like a second chance, not just for Sarah but for me. A chance to be a mother again in a way I hadn't been able to for so long. The hope that bloomed in my chest was vibrant, intoxicating, blinding me to any lingering doubts or unease that might have stirred. I dismissed them as mere anxieties, the natural worries of a mother whose child was finally coming home after so long. This was a new chapter, a fresh start, or so I desperately wanted to believe with every fiber of my being. The week leading up to Sarah's arrival passed in a whirlwind of anticipation, a nervous energy that kept me constantly moving. I cleaned, cooked her favorite meals, and fussed over every detail, eager to create the perfect welcoming atmosphere. I even had fresh flowers, pale pink roses, on her bedside table. When her taxi finally pulled up the long driveway, a familiar anxiety mingled with my overwhelming excitement. My heart hammered against my ribs as she emerged from the car, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The door opened, and there she was, older certainly, with a few more lines around her eyes, a slight weariness in her posture, but still undeniably my Sarah. Her smile, however, seemed to hold a new, almost theatrical quality, a brightness that didn't quite reach her eyes. She dropped her bag and embraced me tightly, a squeeze that felt less like a genuine, heartfelt hug and more like a practiced performance. It was firm, almost possessive, but lacking the deep warmth I remembered. "Oh, Mom, it's so good to be home," she murmured into my hair, her voice thick with what sounded like emotion, and I melted, pushing aside the fleeting sense of unease that had flickered within me. I told myself I was just being overly sensitive, overly analytical after so many years of absence. For the first few days, a tentative normalcy settled over us. We talked for hours, mostly about her travels, which remained frustratingly vague despite my gentle prodding. She spoke of finding herself in exotic locales, of spiritual journeys that seemed to involve a lot of introspection and little practical work. "I spent a year in the Himalayas, Mom, just meditating," she'd say, her eyes distant. "It truly opened my mind." I didn't press for specifics, for details about how she funded these spiritual wanderings. I was simply grateful for her presence, for the sound of her voice filling the quiet house, for the illusion of our renewed connection. She seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking about my gardening, my book club, even my mundane trips to the grocery store. "And you, Mom, what have you been up to, still with the orchids?" It felt like the old days when she would sit at the kitchen table, sharing her day, seeking my advice. This fragile piece, however, began to crack around the edges within the first week. Subtle shifts in her behavior started to emerge, like small cracks in a seemingly solid facade. She was overly complimentary about the house, admiring the antique furniture, the original artwork, even Arthur's old mahogany desk in the study. "This house is just lovely, Mom," she'd say, running her hand along the carved arm of a Victorian chair. So much character, it must be worth a fortune now, especially with the market the way it is. I'd brush it off. It's home, dear, that's all that matters, it's full of memories. But her eyes, I noticed, lingered on certain pieces, on the sterling silver tea set inherited from my grandmother, on the small, framed deed to the property that hung discreetly in the hallway. Her questions about my finances became more frequent, thinly veiled as concerns for my well-being. Are you managing okay, Mom, with just your pension and Arthur's small fund? I worry about you with all these rising costs. I reassured her, I'm perfectly fine, Sarah. Arthur made sure I was well taken care of, we planned meticulously. She would nod, but her gaze would drift, unfocused, as if calculating something in her mind, her lips pressed into a thin line. The requests began innocently enough, small and seemingly insignificant at first. Mom, could you lend me a little for a new phone? Mine's ancient and I can't even get a signal in here. Then, a few days later, I desperately need some new clothes for job interviews. I can't show up looking like a vagabond. Followed by, my old car finally died back in Colorado. Could you help with a down payment on a used one? I can't even look for work without transport, can I? Each request was accompanied by a flood of apologies, promises to pay me back as soon as I'm on my feet, and assurances that she was getting back on track. My heart, still so eager to believe in her, compelled me to open my purse. I saw these as investments in her future, tangible proof of my unwavering love and support. I wanted to help her, to see her thrive, to erase the years of hardship she claimed to have endured. Her affection, which had initially seemed so overwhelming, became subtly conditional. When I readily agreed to a request, her face would light up. She would be effusive, showering me with hugs and compliments, telling me how much she loved me and how grateful she was. You're the best mom in the world, Clara. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're my rock. But if I hesitated or suggested she find alternative solutions, like a bus pass instead of a car down payment, a subtle chill would enter her voice. Her smiles would become strained, her eyes distant and cold. She'd retreat to her room, claiming a sudden headache or exhaustion, only to reappear later with a forced cheerfulness that felt more like a passive-aggressive performance designed to make me feel guilty. The air would grow heavy with unspoken disappointment, and I, desperate to avoid another decade of silence, would usually relent. One evening, I found her in Arthur's study, a room I rarely entered since his passing, as it still felt so profoundly his. She was rummaging through a dusty box of old papers, a box where Arthur kept his important but rarely accessed documents. What are you doing in here, dear? I asked, my voice softer than I felt, a nervous tremor in my stomach. She jumped, startled, almost dropping a sheaf of papers. Oh, Mom, you startled me, just looking for an old photo of Dad. I miss him so much, you know, I was just thinking about him. She held up a faded picture of Arthur, her eyes glistening with what I now recognize as a practiced moisture. But as she quickly stuffed the papers back into the box, I noticed a file folder, slightly ajar, peeking out from beneath some old tax documents. It was marked in bold, block letters. Estate planning. A cold knot formed in my stomach, a premonition of dread. Later that night, long after I heard her bedroom door click shut and the house settled into its deep slumber, I quietly retrieved the folder. Inside, along with Arthur's meticulously organized will and my own older, untouched will, were printed pages from various government websites detailing probate laws, inheritance taxes, and most chillingly, strategies for challenging wills. My name, Clara, was highlighted in several places. My heart pounded like a frightened bird against my ribs. It was impossible. Sarah wouldn't, she couldn't. I tried to convince myself it was an innocent curiosity, perhaps research for a friend who was dealing with a family estate. But the knot in my stomach tightened, a whisper of suspicion that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The hope I had clung to so desperately, the fragile new beginning with my daughter, began to feel like shifting sands beneath my feet, threatening to collapse altogether. The discovery of those printouts, nestled amidst Arthur's solemn estate documents, plunged me, Clara, into a chilling abyss of doubt. The whispers of suspicion that had been barely audible began to scream in my mind, a frantic clamor that drowned out all rational thought. I tried desperately to rationalize it, to find an innocent explanation for the detailed research on inheritance law specifically related to challenging wills, but the sheer volume of information, the targeted nature of it, made my stomach churn with a sickening dread. It was too specific, too purposeful to be mere curiosity. The next morning, I watched Sarah with a new, guarded perspective, a shield forming around my heart. Her affectionate gestures, her seemingly heartfelt compliments, now felt like thinly veiled performances, each word a calculated stroke in a larger painting of deception. The light of reunion, which had filled my home with such warmth, began to flicker, casting long, unsettling shadows that distorted every familiar corner. I knew I needed proof, undeniable evidence, to confront the monstrous thought that was forming in my mind. I couldn't accuse my own daughter, the child I had grieved for, the child I had just welcomed back with open arms, without absolute certainty. The thought alone felt sacrilegious. Over the next few days, I began a meticulous, agonizing search, my movements discreet, my every interaction with Sarah laced with a carefully constructed normalcy. I waited until Sarah left the house for her job interviews that never seemed to lead anywhere, always accompanied by a vague excuse about the market being tough, or they wanted someone younger, more tech-savvy. My first stop was her bedroom, a place I had always considered her private sanctuary. I hated the invasion of privacy, the feeling of betrayal I was inflicting on my own conscience, but the stakes felt too high to succumb to polite boundaries. My hands trembled as I opened her drawers, ran them along the underside of her mattress, and finally, my gaze landed on a small, worn leather journal tucked away beneath a pile of scarves in her closet. It wasn't locked. It lay there, seemingly innocent, yet I felt a primal fear clutching at my throat. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs as I opened it. The neat, familiar handwriting of my daughter filled the pages, but the words themselves were a grotesque parody of the Sarah I thought I knew. Each sentence was a fresh stab to my already wounded soul. "Mom still falls for everything," one entry read, dated just a few days after her arrival. Feigned tears about missing Dad worked a charm. "She just handed over money for new clothes. This is easier than I thought, she's so predictable." My vision blurred with hot, angry tears, but I forced myself to keep reading, compelled by a morbid need to know the full extent of the betrayal, to peel back every layer of the lie. Another entry detailed how she had fabricated a story about a difficult job interview to secure more money for transportation for a car she didn't even have yet. "She's practically begging me to take her money. So desperate for me to stay." The words were a bitter acid in my mouth. The entries grew colder, more calculated, stripping away any pretense of affection. "She's so predictable, always asking about my feelings and my journey. Doesn't she get it? This is just a means to an end. It's all about the inheritance." My breath hitched when I read an entry explicitly outlining her insidious plan: need to start subtly planting seeds about her forgetfulness with her friends. Make them think she's losing it. A few senior moments should do the trick. The sooner I can get legal control, the better. She's got plenty, and it's mine by right, after all the years she forced me to live here. The house, the investments, all of it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about money, it was about stripping me of my autonomy, my very sanity. It was about manipulating my friends, my social circle, to serve her insidious agenda. She was trying to paint me as incompetent, frail, and incapable of managing my own life. Then came the entry that shattered any lingering doubt, any shred of maternal hope, leaving me with a terrifying clarity. "Talk to Daniel about Mom's cognitive decline. He's been surprisingly helpful, almost too eager to believe my stories about her confused spells and lost items. Said he knows a lawyer who specializes in elder care cases. Just need to turn 21 and show I've been managing her affairs while she's incapable. 2 more years of playing the devoted daughter, then the house is as good as mine." Daniel, my late husband's nephew. The very man who had helped me sort out some of Arthur's lesser financial affairs when I was still reeling from grief. I realized with a sickening lurch that he must have been one of her unwitting pawns, unknowingly feeding her information or validating her lies. She was using everyone, manipulating every relationship, every lingering connection, all for my money, all for what she believed was her rightful inheritance. I slammed the journal shut, the sound echoing in the silent room, a definitive period to years of blindness. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, not from fear but from a profound, guttural rage that surged through me, a primal need to protect myself. The Sarah I had welcomed back, the daughter I had longed for, was a phantom, a meticulously crafted lie, a ghost of a memory. The woman standing before me now, in my mind's eye, was a calculating, cold-hearted opportunist, waiting for me to die or to be declared incompetent so she could seize everything I had worked for, everything Arthur and I had built. That evening when Sarah returned, she entered the kitchen with a practiced smile, her voice light. Rough day, Mom, no luck again, but I have a lead for tomorrow. I need a bit more for gas, though. This job search is expensive. She sighed dramatically, waiting for my usual sympathetic response for the loosening of my purse strings. But Clara, truly looked at her, and saw only a stranger. The mask she wore, once so convincing, now seemed transparent, revealing the predatory eyes beneath, the calculating mind at work. A profound sadness washed over me, a sorrow so deep it dwarfed the anger. The daughter I loved, the daughter I grieved for, had never truly returned. She had merely sent a mercenary in her place. This realization, though devastating, was also strangely liberating. The burden of hoping, of striving for a reunion that was never real, lifted. I was free to act, not out of love but out of self-preservation and a fierce desire to protect what was mine. The game, as she had so chillingly written in her journal, was indeed afoot. And I, her predictable mother, was about to become a formidable opponent. The weight of Sarah's deceptions settled heavily upon me, Clara, transforming my entire perspective of my own home and my only child. Each day I moved through the house as if on a carefully constructed stage, playing the part of the doting, somewhat oblivious mother, while internally a silent war raged. The journal remained hidden, its chilling contents burned into my memory, fueling my resolve. I knew I couldn't confront Sarah without a clear, unassailable strategy. Her manipulative nature, now fully exposed, meant she would twist any direct accusation, turn it back on me, or simply deny everything with a convincing performance of wounded innocence. I needed allies, real ones, who saw the world without the rose-tinted glasses I had worn for too long. My first call was to Edward, Arthur's closest friend and our family attorney. He was a man of impeccable integrity, sharp-witted and pragmatic, someone I implicitly trusted, a pillar of quiet strength. I asked him to meet me at his downtown office the very next morning, citing urgent personal matters, avoiding any specific details over the phone, afraid even of the walls having ears. Sitting across from him in his plush office, the city hummed a distant murmur outside his window. I recounted everything, my voice steady, though my hands clutched my purse tightly. Sarah's sudden, seemingly miraculous return, her increasing financial requests, the discovery of the inheritance printouts, and finally, the damning, heartbreaking contents of her journal. I laid it all bare, each word a painful admission of my past blindness. Edward listened patiently, his face a canvas of shifting emotions, from concern to profound sadness, and finally to grim determination. When I finished, the silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by my ragged breathing. He took a deep breath, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "Clara," he said, his voice grave, "this is serious. Financial exploitation, potentially elder abuse, and a clear, documented attempt to defraud you. We need to act, and swiftly. This cannot be ignored." He leaned forward, his gaze firm. He outlined my options with precision and clarity. First, securing my assets. He advised me to immediately review all my bank accounts, credit cards, and investments, changing passwords and ensuring no one else, not even Sarah, had access. He also suggested a comprehensive review of my existing will. "We need to ensure your wishes are unequivocally clear and that Sarah has no legal leverage to challenge it," he explained, his voice brooking no argument. He spoke about legal avenues, possibilities of injunctions if her attempts to have me declared incompetent escalated. The mention of Daniel, Arthur's nephew, came up. Edward agreed to discreetly look into Daniel's involvement, careful not to tip off Sarah. "We need to understand the full scope of her network," he stressed, "and make sure anyone she's misled is made aware of the truth without revealing our hand prematurely." Next, I called Elizabeth, my oldest and dearest friend. Elizabeth had always been my anchor, her sharp wit and unwavering loyalty a constant source of strength, a voice of reason when my own failed. I invited her over for tea, a pretense for a much-needed, raw conversation. Over steaming mugs of chamomile, I laid bare the entire painful truth, the journal clutched in my hand. Elizabeth listened, her face a mixture of shock, profound sadness, and simmering anger on my behalf. "Oh, Clara," she murmured, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "I always worried about Sarah, even when she was a little girl. There was always a certain self-interest about her beneath all that charm." She then confessed that Sarah had in fact approached her recently, asking innocuous questions about my health, my memory, even my mood swings. Elizabeth, unknowingly, had been part of Sarah's information-gathering network. She asked if you'd been talking about your finances a lot, Elizabeth admitted, her eyes wide with dismay. I just thought she was concerned, you know. She said you seemed a bit overwhelmed after Arthur passed. Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry. The realization that Sarah had been manipulating even my closest friend, my confidant, twisting their concern into tools for her own ends, was another stinging blow. Elizabeth, however, was resolute, her resolve hardening as she processed the gravity of the situation. We'll deal with this, together. She offered to keep a closer eye on Sarah's interactions with others, to subtly counter any narrative Sarah might be attempting to spin about my cognitive decline. She also offered to help me review my household expenses, to ensure no additional hidden thefts were occurring. Her unwavering support was a lifeline in the turbulent waters of my betrayal, a beacon of genuine care amidst the darkness. Back home, I began the meticulous task of changing all my banking information. It was tedious, emotionally draining. Each new password and security question a stark reminder of Sarah's deceit, of the vulnerability she had exploited. I called my bank, explained the situation without naming Sarah explicitly, citing unusual activity, and had alerts set up for any unusual withdrawals or large transactions. I even had a new, discreet security system installed, ostensibly for peace of mind after a recent local break-in, but truly to monitor Sarah's movements within the house and protect my remaining valuables. I felt like a spy in my own home, a grim and unsettling reality that gnawed at my soul. The silent battle had begun. I continued to play my role, offering Sarah meals, listening to her vague stories, even nodding along to her thinly veiled suggestions about financial planning for the future and making sure your assets are protected. But beneath the surface, I was a fortress, securing my defenses, mobilizing my allies, and preparing for the inevitable, painful confrontation. The hope of reconciliation was dead, extinguished by the cold, hard facts of her betrayal. It was replaced by a steely resolve to protect myself and ensure that my hard-earned legacy would not fall into the hands of a deceptive child. This was no longer about a mother's unconditional love, but a fight for my autonomy, my dignity, and my future. With Edward's meticulous guidance and Elizabeth's unwavering support, I, Clara, moved swiftly and decisively to secure my legacy and reclaim my autonomy. The first, most crucial step was to revise my will. The very document that Sarah coveted, the key to her perceived inheritance, would ironically become the instrument of her ultimate surprise. I spent hours with Edward in his quiet office, poring over clauses and stipulations, ensuring that my true wishes were explicitly stated, leaving no room for misinterpretation or challenge. My previous will, crafted years ago when Sarah was still a beloved, if sometimes challenging, child, had designated her as my sole beneficiary, a testament to the boundless love I had for my only daughter. Now that would change, irrevocably. The decision to exclude Sarah entirely from my direct inheritance was not made lightly. It was a wrenching process, a tearing of the last threads of a bond I had once held sacred, a profound act of self-preservation. Edward, a man of great compassion, seeing my pain, offered alternatives, suggestions for a trust fund with strict conditions, or a smaller symbolic sum, a final gesture of maternal concern. But I shook my head, my voice firm despite the tremor that still occasionally ran through my hand. No, I said, my gaze steady. She has shown her true colors. Any financial provision, even a conditional one, would only fuel her manipulation, her sense of entitlement. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. This isn't punishment, Edward, it's a direct outcome of her choices. It's the only way she might ever learn, if she is capable of it. Instead, I designated a significant portion of my estate to several charities that Arthur and I had passionately supported throughout our lives: the local animal shelter, a literacy program for adults, and a foundation for underprivileged children that provided scholarships. These were causes that resonated with our shared values, legacies of compassion that transcended personal greed. I also allocated a substantial sum to Elizabeth, not as payment for her loyalty, but as a token of my enduring gratitude for her true friendship, a bond that had weathered every storm. There was a provision for a small, distant relative, a nephew I rarely saw but who had always been genuinely kind and sent me thoughtful holiday cards, a stark contrast to Sarah's calculated affection. The rest, I decided, would go into a carefully managed fund for my own future care, ensuring my independence and dignity for as long as possible. preventing any possibility of being forced into a situation where my finances might be controlled by others. The irony was not lost on me. The money Sarah so desperately coveted would now serve purposes far more noble and genuinely caring than her own selfish desires. While the legal work progressed with Edward, I also took tangible steps to physically and emotionally detach myself from Sarah's pervasive influence within my home. I quietly transferred all my liquid assets into new accounts at a different bank, accessible only to me, and discreetly closed the small joint account we had briefly set up when she first returned, which I had only funded with a paltry sum, thanks to my newfound caution. I informed her casually during one of our strained breakfasts that I was streamlining my finances and that her contributions towards household expenses, which were always negligible, were no longer necessary, as I had found a better way to manage things. She looked briefly annoyed, a flash of irritation crossing her face, but dismissed it, assuming it was a minor inconvenience, unaware of the vast, irrevocable changes unfolding beneath her very nose. She probably thought I was just being old and fussy. I also began to actively reconnect with friends and acquaintances whom Sarah had subtly alienated me from during her presence. I hosted a small tea party inviting women from my book club and garden group who had, at Sarah's suggestion, given me more space lately, a subtle social distancing she had orchestrated. Over cucumber sandwiches and Earl Grey, I subtly contradicted Sarah's earlier insinuations about my memory, sharing anecdotes with sharp detail, engaging in lively debates about current events, and recounting humorous stories with perfect recall. I watched as the relief dawned on their faces, their eyes widening as they realized I was still the same Clara they knew, not the frail, forgetful woman Sarah had painted. The social isolation, which had been a slow, creeping poison, began to lift, replaced by the comforting warmth of genuine camaraderie. One afternoon, I sat in my garden, pruning roses, their fragrant petals a soft velvet against my fingertips, a sense of quiet triumph settling over me. The legal documents were signed, sealed, and securely filed. My financial house was in order, fortress-like against any future incursions. My social connections were being painstakingly re-established, stronger and more authentic than before. Sarah, meanwhile, remained utterly oblivious, continuing her daily charade. She would still ask seemingly innocent questions about my day, her eyes darting to my purse or her gaze lingering on a piece of jewelry I wore. She still played the part of the concerned daughter, occasionally even offering to help with household chores, transparently hoping to gain favor. I would smile, thank her, and politely decline, always maintaining the facade of the trusting, albeit slightly senile, mother. The silence of the house, which had once felt like a void, an echo of my loneliness, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where I was once again the sole sovereign. The air, once thick with the unspoken tension of Sarah's manipulation, now felt light, breathable, infused with a newfound sense of peace. I no longer dreaded her presence, no longer felt the constant anxiety of her next insidious move. Instead, I felt a quiet strength blossoming within me, a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I was reclaiming my life, piece by painful piece, and it was a victory more profound than any inheritance could ever be. The legacy I was truly preserving was not just my money, but my dignity, my autonomy, and my hard-won peace of mind. The air in my living room felt thick with unspoken expectation, heavy with the weight of impending truth. Clara, sat opposite Sarah, a small, unassuming manila envelope resting on the polished surface of the coffee table between us. Edward, my attorney, sat beside me, his presence a quiet but formidable support, his expression neutral but watchful. Sarah, radiating an artificial cheerfulness, a carefully constructed facade, had clearly anticipated this meeting for weeks. She probably imagined a formal reading of Arthur's will, perhaps a revised version of mine, where she would finally be granted access to the substantial wealth she believed was hers by right, her birthright. Her eyes, I noticed, kept flicking subtly to the envelope, a subtle greed gleaming within their depths, barely concealed. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor that still occasionally ran through my hand or the frantic pounding of my heart. Edward and I needed to discuss some important family matters. Matters of the estate. Sarah nodded, her smile fixed, a little too wide, a little too bright. "Of course, Mom, I'm always here for you, whatever you need, you know that." The words, once so comforting, now rang hollow, a cruel echo of her deceitful charade. Edward, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the tension beginning to coil in the air, cleared his throat, his gaze unwavering as it met Sarah's. "Sarah," he began, his tone professional, devoid of emotion, "Clara has made some significant revisions to her estate planning. She felt it was important to discuss them with you personally, to ensure clarity and avoid any future misunderstandings." Sarah's smile faltered ever so slightly, a tiny crack in her composure. "Oh, are you changing things from Dad's will? I thought everything was settled, that his wishes were clear." She looked at me, a hint of accusation in her eyes, a subtle attempt to make me feel guilty for disrupting her expectations. "No," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "Arthur's will remains as he intended, sacred and unchanged. This concerns my own estate, Sarah, the one you've shown such keen and alarming interest in since your return." Her cheeks flushed, a deeper red spreading across her face, but she quickly recovered, attempting to feign innocence, a wounded look on her face. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mom. I've only ever been concerned for your well-being, your financial security. You're getting older and—" I raised a hand, cutting her off, my voice losing its calm facade, becoming edged with a steely resolve that surprised even myself. "Sarah," I stated, each word a hammer blow against her carefully constructed lies. "Stop lying, the charade is over. I know about the inheritance printouts you researched, the ones tucked away in Arthur's old desk. I know about the questions you asked Daniel about my cognitive decline. And I know about the journal, Sarah. Every single calculated lie you've spun since you walked back into this house, pretending to be a loving, concerned daughter, waiting for me to falter so you could seize what you believe is yours." The color drained from her face, leaving her ashen, a ghost of her former self. The polished veneer cracked and shattered, revealing a raw, startled fear beneath. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish out of water. You went through my things," she stammered, her voice thin, trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You had no right, that's an invasion of privacy." Her eyes darted frantically to Edward, then back to me, trapped and utterly exposed. "Perhaps not a legal right, no, Sarah," I agreed, my voice now laced with bitter triumph, each word a vindicating truth. "But I had every moral right to know who was living under my roof, who was plotting to declare me incompetent, who was waiting impatiently for me to die so you could get your money. That crosses every line of respect, every boundary of a mother's trust." Sarah scrambled for a defense, her mind clearly racing, trying to find an escape route, a way to spin the narrative back in her favor. "Mom, those were just notes. Ideas. I was just curious about how things worked. You think I'm a monster? After all I've been through, after coming back here to you, you're just doing this because I hurt your feelings, aren't you? Because I said something you didn't like?" Her voice was rising, becoming shrill, desperate, frantic. She tried to twist it, to make herself the victim, to elicit sympathy. Edward intervened, his voice calm but firm, cutting through her rising hysteria like a knife. "Sarah, Clara has documented evidence of your intentions, attempts to defraud, potential elder abuse. This is far beyond hurt feelings, and it is a matter we take very seriously." He gestured to the unsuspecting envelope on the coffee table. "Clara has decided to revise her will. As a result of your documented actions, you are no longer included as a beneficiary of her estate." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth fell open, a silent gasp, as if all the air had been knocked from her lungs. Her eyes widened, a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock, followed almost immediately by a terrifying, unbridled rage that transformed her face. "What?" she whispered, then screamed, the sound echoing harshly in the quiet room. "What? You can't do that. I'm your daughter, that's my inheritance, that's my right, this is my house, my family money." She lunged for the envelope, her hand outstretched like a claw, but Edward, ever vigilant, deftly moved it out of her reach, placing his hand protectively over it. "No, Sarah," I said, my voice now strong, unwavering, holding all the authority I had lacked for so long. "It is my money, and my right to decide what happens to it. And what happens now is that it will go to people and causes far more deserving of it than you." I detailed, calmly, deliberately, the charities, the provisions for Elizabeth, the fund for my own future care. Each word was a deliberate dagger, puncturing the balloon of her greed and entitlement, deflating her monstrous expectations. She stood up, trembling, her face contorted with fury, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "You manipulative old woman, you think you can just cut me out? I'll challenge it. I'll tell everyone what you've done. I'll make sure no one believes a word you say about me. I'll ruin your reputation." She was threatening, lashing out wildly, but her words held no power over me anymore. The fear she had once instilled was gone, replaced by a profound weariness, a sense of pity for her utter self-destruction. "You are welcome to try, Sarah," Edward stated, his voice even, unyielding. "But Clara's will is ironclad, legally sound, and based on irrefutable evidence of your actions. And if you attempt any further fraudulent actions, any harassment, or any attempt to challenge this will, we will not hesitate to pursue legal action against you." He then pointed to the door, his gesture clear and final. "I believe this meeting is concluded. You have until tomorrow morning, Sarah, to vacate the premises. All of your belongings will be packed and left on the curb for pickup at 9 a.m. Do not return." Sarah stared at us, a wounded, venomous look in her eyes, a mixture of disbelief and impotent rage. Then, with a guttural cry of pure, unadulterated frustration, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the living room, leaving behind a silence that, this time, felt not empty but profoundly liberating. The confrontation was over. The truth was out, ugly and painful though it was. And I, Clara, felt an unexpected lightness, as if a monumental, suffocating weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The fight was far from over, but the first, decisive battle had been won. The abrupt, furious departure of Sarah left a lingering tension in the air, a phantom chill even after her angry footsteps had faded into the quiet hum of the afternoon. The silence that followed her final, enraged shout was unlike any I, Clara, had experienced before. It wasn't the lonely quiet of an empty nest, nor the strained quiet of unresolved conflict. It was a silence that felt heavy with finality, yet also strangely, profoundly cleansing. Edward stayed for a while longer, ensuring I was all right, his presence a steady anchor in the aftermath of the storm. "She'll likely try to cause trouble," he warned, his voice grave, "but you've done everything right, Clara. We're prepared for whatever she throws at us." His words were a much-needed comfort, a constant reminder that I was no longer alone in this battle, no longer a blind victim. The next morning, Sarah was gone. She had left nothing but a few forgotten toiletries on her bathroom counter, a faint, lingering scent of her cloying perfume in her old bedroom, and the lingering residue of her deceit. There was no note, no apology, no last desperate attempt at reconciliation, no desperate plea for understanding. Just a hasty, angry departure under the cover of darkness. A small, almost imperceptible part of me, the old Clara, the mother who had yearned for her daughter's return for so long, felt a pang of sorrow for what might have been, for the beautiful dream that had turned into a nightmare. But that pang was quickly eclipsed by a surging wave of relief, a profound sense of liberation that washed over me, light and encompassing. The parasite was gone. The constant vigilance, the exhausting performance of false cordiality, the underlying anxiety that had gnawed at me for months, all of it had vanished with her. The first few days after her departure were a mixture of profound exhaustion and exhilarating freedom. I slept more soundly than I had in years, unburdened by the need to pretend, to guard my every word and gesture, to anticipate her next manipulative move. I started to rediscover the simple joys of my life that had been overshadowed and almost suffocated by Sarah's toxic presence. I spent hours in my garden, tending to my orchids and roses, their vibrant colors and delicate fragrances a stark contrast to the grayness that had recently clouded my world. I reread my favorite novels, losing myself in their pages without distraction, without the fear of being interrupted by a veiled request for money or a new accusation. Elizabeth was my first visitor, arriving with a warm hug, a freshly baked apple pie, and her characteristic directness. "How are you, sweet Clara?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for any lingering pain, any hidden cracks in my resolve. "Free, Elizabeth," I replied, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across my face. Truly free for the first time in a very long time. We talked for hours, replaying the confrontation, laughing at Sarah's stunned, then furious reaction, and commiserating over the years of manipulation. Elizabeth shared how incredibly relieved she was that I had finally seen the truth, lamenting her own unwitting participation in Sarah's insidious schemes. "She was so convincing, Clara. I felt terrible repeating her stories about your memory, but I thought I was helping." Her presence was a testament to the true relationships in my life, the ones built on genuine affection and trust, not on selfish motives or veiled threats. I began to actively cultivate these authentic connections, nurturing them like delicate plants. I rejoined my bridge club, attended more events with my book group, eagerly engaging in discussions, and even started volunteering at the local animal shelter, one of the charities named in my revised will. It felt incredibly good to contribute, to be part of something larger than myself, to interact with people who valued my companionship, my insights, and my contributions, not my assets. I found a surprising sense of purpose in these new endeavors, a reminder that my life was far from over, despite the painful chapter with Sarah. My schedule slowly filled with meaningful activities, replacing the endless hours I once spent worrying and waiting for a daughter who wasn't truly there. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Daniel. I opened it with trepidation, bracing myself for accusations or denials, perhaps a legal threat. Instead, it was an apology, heartfelt and sincere. He explained that Sarah had indeed approached him, weaving a convincing narrative about my fragile state and her desire to help me manage my affairs. He admitted he had been naive, influenced by her charm and his own misplaced desire to help out his cousin, especially after Arthur's passing. He offered to assist me in any way he could, expressing deep regret for his unwitting role in her scheme, providing any information he could about her tactics. While it didn't entirely erase the hurt of his past gullibility, it was a balm to my weary soul, a testament to the fact that not everyone was as deceitful as Sarah. I decided to respond, offering him forgiveness and perhaps a path to rebuilding a healthier relationship, one based on honesty and mutual respect. The silence in my home no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, expansive, filled with my own thoughts, my own choices, my own burgeoning passions. The weight of being a victim had lifted, replaced by the empowering knowledge that I had taken control, that I had fought for myself and won. The scars of Sarah's betrayal would always be there, a painful reminder of a difficult lesson learned. But they no longer defined me. Instead, they were badges of survival, proof of my resilience, my quiet strength, and my unwavering spirit. I was rebuilding my life, brick by painful brick, day by deliberate day, not for anyone else but purely for myself. The future, once clouded by uncertainty and fear, now held the promise of quiet contentment, of genuine connection, and of a peace that was truly, wholly my own. Months turned into a year and then another, and the raw wounds of betrayal, though not entirely forgotten, had scabbed over, allowing new, resilient growth to flourish. My home, once a stage for Sarah's calculated deceit, now resonated with authentic warmth, filled with the sounds of my own choosing. Classical music, the gentle murmur of friends' voices, the cheerful chirping of birds from my garden. I, Clara, found a rhythm of life that was profoundly fulfilling, a quiet contentment that permeated every corner of my existence. My garden thrived, bursting with vibrant colors and lush life, a living, breathing mirror to my own renewed spirit. My days were filled with purpose, volunteering at the animal shelter, attending lively discussions with my book group, and perhaps most surprisingly, pursuing a long-dormant interest in painting. The easel, which had gathered dust in the attic for decades, now stood proudly in my sunroom, its canvases slowly filling with vibrant landscapes, contemplative still lifes, and abstract explorations of color and form, each stroke a testament to my newfound freedom. My friendship with Elizabeth deepened further, becoming an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of shared adversity. We often talked about Sarah, not with bitterness or lingering resentment, but with a detached understanding, an analytical perspective that came with time and distance. "It's a shame, Clara," Elizabeth would say over our weekly tea, her hand resting on mine, "that she couldn't see what she truly lost. She traded genuine love for an illusion of wealth." I agreed. Sarah had indeed lost more than an inheritance. She had lost the unconditional love of a mother, the stability of a true home, and the precious chance to build a genuine, honest life. There had been no further contact from Sarah. No threats, no legal challenges, no desperate pleas. It seemed the confrontation and Edward's firm stance had finally deterred her, forcing her to confront the reality of her choices. The silence from her was a quiet, profound testament to my victory, a silent acknowledgement that her manipulative game was truly over, and that I was no longer a pawn in her schemes. My relationship with Daniel also continued to mend and strengthen. He visited occasionally, offering sincere apologies and genuine companionship. He was a good man, remorseful for his past gullibility, and his presence brought a different kind of familial comfort, one based on honesty, respect, and shared history, rather than obligation or manipulation. He listened intently to my stories, shared details of his own quiet life, and slowly, carefully, we began to build a respectful and caring connection, a quiet friendship that filled a small, unexpected void. The financial security I had painstakingly reestablished, the careful planning with Edward, gave me a profound sense of peace. I no longer worried about every expenditure, every unexpected bill. The funds I had allocated for my own future care meant I could age with dignity, free from the fear of being a burden on anyone, free from the looming threat of financial exploitation. It was a liberation that allowed me to truly live in the present, to enjoy my golden years without the haunting shadow of past betrayals. I could travel, take classes, pursue hobbies, all on my own terms. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my porch swing, sipping a cup of fragrant Earl Grey tea and watching the leaves turn brilliant shades of red and gold in my garden, a profound sense of contentment settled over me. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a distant chimney. I thought back to the moment I first heard Sarah's voice on the phone after all those years, the surge of fragile hope, the desperate yearning for reconciliation, the blinding desire to have my daughter back. It had been a long, arduous journey filled with bitter realizations and heartbreaking truths. But it had also been a journey of profound awakening, of self-discovery, of reclaiming my own narrative. I had learned to trust my instincts, to protect myself fiercely, and to discern genuine affection from calculated manipulation. The person I had become was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than the Clara who had so desperately welcomed her daughter home. I had faced the ultimate betrayal from my own flesh and blood, a wound that cut deeper than any other, and I had not only survived but thrived. I had rewritten the narrative of my life, taking back the pen from those who sought to control it, and filling the pages with my own choices, my own desires, my own authentic happiness. My story was not one of lingering bitterness, but of profound transformation. It was a testament to the fact that even the deepest family wounds can, with time and effort, heal, leaving behind not just scars but a newfound strength, a quiet wisdom. It taught me that while some families are bound by blood, true family is forged in respect, honesty, and unconditional love, regardless of biological ties. And sometimes, losing what you thought you desperately wanted can lead you to discover what you truly need, a deeper, more enduring sense of self and purpose. This was my new beginning, a future forged in clarity, lived on my own terms, bathed in the gentle warmth of peace. Thanks you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, please make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments.